How to use podcast sponsorships to drive traffic to your landing page or website. Traffic is always a hot topic among any digital marketer or online business because it's the lifeblood of what we're trying to do. We need to generate traffic in order to generate leads, convert that to sales, which obviously generates revenue, and that's how we stay in business. So there's always a question about what is the best way to generate traffic and drive it to our web pages, our lead capture pages, and into our sales funnels so we can start to get more customers and grow as a business. Now, there are a lot of different methods that are out there, and they all have pros and cons. SEO, or search engine optimization, is one of the oldest, and the reason it's really appealing is because it doesn't cost anything. So people really like it. However, it's a moving target, it's very competitive, and it requires a lot of technical knowledge to do it in a way that really works. Then you have the online advertising where it costs money, but you can get instant results. So unlike something like SEO where it's long-term, or content marketing where it's long-term, with ads you can start to run them and literally start to see clicks and traffic and sales the same day. The challenge with that is it costs money on the inside to start, so the issue is if you don't convert that into more than what you're spending, you can run out of money really fast. And that's become very sophisticated and competitive as well. So everyone's always looking for the better mousetrap. How are we going to be able to get traffic and do it in a way that makes sense, particularly if we're not a big business? We don't have a lot of a budget. You know, a lot of solopreneurs and small businesses have very bootstrapped type budgets. And so the question becomes, where is the best bang for our buck? What can we do to generate traffic? Well, one of the newest and most effective ways of driving traffic and advertising, believe it or not, is actually podcast sponsorship. It's taken hold and it's growing very, very rapidly. You're seeing lots of new podcasts pop up, and that's because people that want to start a podcast realize that there are a lot of advertisers, there are a lot of brands that are shifting their dollars away from traditional ads and traditional other marketing methods and into podcasts. And that's because it flat out works. There's actually a website online that tracks this, and it tracks the additional spend. And some very reputable, well-known companies have multiplied their investment in podcast advertising by 50%, 100%, 500%, 1,000%, and more over the course of just a couple of months. Because as they've started to dabble in it, they've realized it's really effective. And it's really effective for a very couple of important reasons, and we'll go over that. But the important thing that I want to share on this particular episode is that podcast sponsorships can be an effective way to drive traffic to our landing page or website, and I want to share strategies for how to leverage that podcast sponsorship, and throughout I'll explain why it's so effective as well. But let's talk about some strategies, so if we want to use that ourselves, how we can be effective in doing this. The first thing that we want to do, and this is always the most important with just about anything, is we want to start by choosing the relevant podcasts. Not all podcasts are created equal for our particular audience. If my audience is dog lovers and I'm advertising on a podcast about car insurance, it's probably not going to be a great match. You know, there would be some overlap in the audience, but there isn't enough synergy there for it to make enough sense. What we want is as close to perfect alignment as we can get. So if, you know, for example, with the optYOUmize podcast here, we work with entrepreneurs. Our audience is entrepreneurs, small business owners, solopreneurs. If I had a product or service that was geared for them, then this would be a great podcast for it. If I wanted to do, you know, something about chess, then I would obviously go to a chess podcast and focus on that. So we want to choose a relevant podcast that's going to make sense where the majority of our market is going to hang out. Because the closer our audience aligns, the higher percentage of that audience is going to be potential buyers, customers, and prospects for our business. And so it ensures that we're reaching potential customers instead of just shotgunning it and hoping that there's enough people in there to make it worthwhile. Once we've identified podcasts in our niche, and this is very easy, There are charts out there. You can do searches for podcasts in blank niche or blank with the niche name podcast, and it will pull up a list of all these different ones. And by the way, it's important to note, they don't all need to be the highest ranked or the most popular. Those are going to be the ones that are the most expensive. If you go to the top 5 podcasts in a particular category, they have their pick of advertisers because everybody wants to advertise with them. So if we're a small business, if we're a solopreneur, we have a limited budget and we try to go after them, we're going to be spending thousands of dollars and we haven't proven the concept yet. It's best to work our way up and start with podcasts that don't have as much of a universal reputation yet. They wouldn't be in the crosshairs of any large companies, brands, or advertisers because they're too small or they're too unknown. However, that can be perfect for what we're looking to do because they aren't going to charge very much. They don't have a track record yet. And so they might not even know what their own podcast is worth in terms of sponsorship or advertising. But basically the way it works is we then want to create a unique URL. So when we've targeted them and we found the podcast we want to do, and we reach out to those podcasters to say, hey, can I sponsor this? What's going to happen is you're going to get an ad that in the very beginning that says, this episode is sponsored by XYZ company, the leading provider of blah, 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 whatever, widgets. But in addition to that, you usually get an ad in the middle and sometimes at the end as well that's a little bit longer and tells more specifically about your product and service. So what we want to do is we want to create a unique URL, a unique web link, whether it's a separate web page with its own unique link or a tracking link. But this way we can actually track what we're getting in terms of pure results, and we know which of the podcasts we're working with are actually working and generating the results. So it should be a custom, easy to remember URL, preferably. If it's based on our website, but then it has like one sort of extension on it for a sub page, and it's really short and easy to remember, that's fantastic. Because not only will it appear in the podcast show notes, but also when the podcast host reads it out loud, it'll be easy for people to remember, and they'll even be able to go there while they're listening, as opposed to needing to wait, look at the show notes, figure out what the link is, click on it, in which case you'll lose some people because of that. But we want to make that URL specific for those podcast listeners based on the ads we're going to be running there. And we want it to be able to visit our landing page. It's best to create a custom page that's designed for this in particular, even if it's connected to our website, as opposed to sending them directly to the general website. It allows us to track the traffic from the podcast sponsorship. The third thing that we want to do is we want to offer an exclusive promotion. We can send people directly to our site or directly to our offer, which is the same offer everybody else gets, and that's fine. But it's smart initially to make it special. Offer something that not everybody else would get, or a coupon code that nobody else would know if they didn't listen. It's not only going to help us understand where the audience is coming from, but it's going to incentivize those people to actually take action, to buy, to sign up, to whatever, because they're getting a special deal. If they're just going to a website and they realize, well, I could come back here next week and buy this, there's no incentive for them to hurry up and go get it. So we want to do that and offer an exclusive promotion that makes them want to do it right now. So we can give the podcast listeners a special discount, offer available only through a custom URL, or coupon code, or whatever it is. The fourth thing that we want to do is we want to craft compelling ad copy. Now, there's two ways to do this. So to understand the way podcast ads work, typically if you're a sponsor, you will get sort of a shout out in the beginning of the episode where the host will say, this episode is sponsored by blah, 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 and the host actually reads that. But in addition, it's been shown that host-read ads are more effective than canned ads that are inserted into a podcast, because when the host is reading it, there's almost like a built-in or assumed endorsement of the product. And because the audience is already bonded with the podcast host, if the podcast host says, hey, this is great, go there, get this, they're more likely to do it than if there's a pause in the podcast, it rolls some music in the background with some overproduced ad. That can work as well. And if you really want to control the content that's being said, then you may want to go that route. But in general, host-read ads are proven to be more effective because the host is involved in it, and the host can ad-lib and use their normal tone and the way they normally talk with their audience, but integrate your product into it. The risk of that, of course, is that because it's organic and host-read, there's no guarantee they're going to say exactly what you want. However, the happy medium is that you can provide the host with bullets that you want them to include in what they're talking about. So this way you get a little bit of control over what is going to be said to make sure the main points are covered. At the same time, you get the benefit of the host's relationship with the audience because they're doing the reading of it themselves as opposed to it just being some canned ad that's playing in there. So most podcast hosts are going to be very open and receptive to this. They understand that the value their podcast has to you is only as good as their ability to drive traffic, leads, and sales to you. So most people are very open to doing this and will work with you to make sure that you create an engaging ad content that clearly communicates the value proposition and encourages the listeners to visit your landing page or your website. The fifth tip, and I touched on this already, but I'm going to say it again, is to utilize host-read ads. When possible, you want to opt for host-read ads because when the host is reading the ad, they have the connection with the audience. The listeners already trust the podcast host. It's why they tune in. They like the podcast host's voice or their sense of humor or their stories or something about it makes them tune in and listen. And podcast listeners in general tend to be far more attentive and far more engaged in the content than any other social media. And this is a really important point. I said I would weave this in throughout, and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring it up again later. But the fact is, one of the things that makes podcasts so effective as an advertising medium for brands and advertisers is that podcast listeners consume much more of each podcast than any other social media. So videos on YouTube, if you can get 20-25% viewing of your videos, if they're longer than 60 seconds, that's pretty good. That's a pretty low percentage, but that's actually pretty good for YouTube. If people scroll through your content on Instagram or Facebook and they engage for more than like a few seconds, that's pretty good. It's hard to convince people to buy stuff in that sort of framework. It's hard to develop a relationship in that sort of framework. And this is why, by the way, the other phenomenon we're seeing is that in addition to people pumping more money into podcast ads, they're pulling money out of social media influencer ads because they're finding that except for select cases and specific influencers and things that are very tightly tied to what their product or service is, it's actually less effective because they don't have the attention of the audience the same way podcast hosts do. But in addition to the pure minutes, so for example, a podcast listener will listen on average for whatever it is, 15, 16 minutes to a podcast. That's a lot longer than any video or social media or whatever, but also as a percentage, it's far higher. So if you have a 20-minute podcast episode, on average, you could get people to listen to 15 of those 20 minutes. That's remarkable. With a YouTube video, it's like 20%. So it'd be like they listen to the first 5 minutes and then they click off. Everyone's got ADD in those particular environments and they're constantly bombarded with new content. So we're bouncing around all over the place and unable to focus on one thing. When we have people listening to a podcast, they're a captive audience. They listen to it on their way to work. They listen to it when they're doing their chores. They listen to it, when they're driving in their car, whatever. But it could be background that they're doing while they're doing something else, but they're more engaged as listeners. And this is why it's really taking off as a method and a medium to use for advertising. So people are more likely to act on host recommendations as well as a result of that. The sixth thing that we want to do is we want to include a clear call to action. It's wonderful to have a host give you a shout out. It's wonderful to have your product or service or company or website mentioned on a podcast. That doesn't mean people will automatically go straight there. When I do interview segments, one of the things that I always do is I will ask the guest to share where to find them and what their links are and everything else. But I will also always say at the end of the episode, a reminder of exactly where to go, visit this link, go to this website, go to LinkedIn and visit their profile, whatever, because it's super important. If the guest is taking their time to be with me on the episode, I want to make sure that the audience benefits too. So whatever other stuff they've got to offer, I want to make sure that we make that really clear with a very specific, clear call to action. If we ensure that our ad explicitly tells listeners to visit the landing page and explains what they'll find there, they're more likely to do it. And here's a $1 million tip that's really important about that. It needs to be one call of action. There's a temptation when we run an ad to want to throw the kitchen sink out there and say, well, listen, connect with me on Facebook and follow me on LinkedIn and go to my website, download my free guide, check out my videos. You're going to lose everybody. You're going to lose everybody if you try to have them do multiple things. You can send them to one place that then has a call to action and then that leads them to other stuff, and that's fine. But we need to treat it like a funnel, not like a shotgun, where we just throw a bunch of stuff out there and hope they latch on to something. Give them one specific, clear call to action, let them follow that, and let that be the way that we either capture them as a lead, which then we can market all those other things to them, or we have something on that page that once they sign up, they're exposed to the rest of it. Once they're in our funnel, that's okay, because we can go back to them again and again. But until they're in our funnel, if we overwhelm them with too many things to do, they're confused, they don't know what to do, and they end up doing nothing, and we get nothing out of it. And so it's super important to have a singular call to action. The seventh thing that we want to do is we want to optimize our landing page. Now, even if we're driving traffic to our website, the lazy way to do this, and this is the way a lot of people do it because it's easier. I have a website set up. It's got all the resources on there. It's awesome. So I'm going to do a podcast ad and I'm going to say, visit my website. Well, what happens is somebody visits your website and it's a generic website page that's there for anyone and everyone. If instead we have a targeted page that's welcome blank podcast listeners, right? One for each one or whatever, with the name of the podcast in there, wow, what a difference. The person comes to that page and they see they're being welcomed and they recognize the name of the podcast they listen to. Now you've got them. Now they're paying attention because you're speaking to them directly. They realize this is special, this is different. You're not just dumping me on your website where everybody else goes to. And you create a specific landing page that's simple, clean, fast, SEO optimized, and easy to remember with a URL, and have that landing page have that congruent one thing call to action. So if, for example, on our ad, we say, go to xyz.com/yes, something like that, to download my free guide about how to make, 10 million subscribers to your, YouTube channel or whatever. If they go there and it says, welcome blank podcast listeners, download your free guide, 10,000 free, it's totally congruent. So they heard this on the podcast. They clicked through. They see that the web page matches what they were just listening to, and they see the value that's offered is exactly the value that was promised on the podcast episode. Boom. That is very tight, it's very clean, and you're going to get a much higher percentage of conversion and signups with that sort of a setup than anything else. Then again, once you've got them signed up, you can market all your other things. But we want to make sure that we're addressing their needs and expectations and being congruent with what they heard on the ad. So we want to focus on what our biggest benefit is that we're going to give them, promote that in the ad, and have a specified, specific landing page designed for that in particular. The eighth thing we want to do is leverage multiple episodes. If we have the budget, it's always better because repetition is super important in advertising and marketing. A lot of people will hear something and they might even think to do it, but they forget. Or they're not at their computer, they don't have their phone on them, they're driving in the car. So they meant to go visit your page, but they just never got there. When we do it again and again and again, and we're able to advertise on multiple episodes, now we're going to start to scoop up a lot more people. It also shows that we're committed to what we're doing. It shows that we're committed to this audience, and it shows that we're here for the long haul. If we run one ad and then disappear, they don't know if our company is even real. They don't know if what we're offering is real. So we want to do that. They say it takes an average of 7 contacts for someone to actually become a prospect or a customer. So we want to be able to leverage that by advertising on multiple episodes. We don't have to do them all consecutively. We can do one a week or one a month or whatever it is, but we want to try to keep with the same ones until we can prove and validate whether they work for us or not. And then if they're not working, we can switch to other ones. And the ones that are, we can invest more in. So we want to increase the frequency and brand recall by doing that. The 9th thing we want to do is integrate with other marketing efforts. Promote that podcast sponsorship across our other marketing channels to create a cohesive campaign. Then instead of people listening to us brag about our own products or tell them how great they are and why they should go buy them, they can go and listen to the podcast and have the host of the podcast tell them to go do it. There's your social proof. There's your better advertising. There's your third-party endorsement. The 10th thing we want to do is track and analyze the results. This is vitally important. Like anything else, if we don't know when we're spending money on our advertising and promotion, what's working, how do we know where to spend more money and where to reallocate money that isn't working for us? We want to use analytical tools to monitor our traffic from our custom URL and adjust our strategy based on performance. The one caveat to that is we want to be careful to make sure we give it enough time and that we're patient enough. If we run one ad and we don't get 100 million signups, so we pull it, we may have pulled the plug too early. We have to give it a little bit of time and be a little bit patient to make sure whether or not it's working. And the 11th thing is to consider long-term partnerships. If we podcasters are human beings. If we work with them, we contact them, and we try to set up a relationship that's a win-win, we may be able to get a better deal for ourselves by providing them with some security of knowing they've got an ongoing sponsor. So we don't always have to focus on the rates per ad short term. Instead, we could say, hey, listen, what would this look like if we sponsored you for a year? What kind of relationship, what kind of deal can we strike where we're going to sponsor one episode a week or a month for a whole year? Can we do something in there where we get something extra for it? Or, we in return, you get a committed advertiser and brand that you can continue to promote. So building ongoing relationships with podcasts can lead to more authentic integrations and better results over time. The more goodwill we build with the podcast host, the more they're going to push us with conviction. And that is going to get us better results. By implementing these strategies, we can effectively use podcast sponsorships to drive targeted traffic to our landing page and increase conversions. So the takeaway here is that we're always looking for more ways to generate traffic. And one of the newer ways that's really catching on fast is podcast sponsorships, because podcast audiences are loyal and they immerse more in the content than they do on social media or any other platform. The average listen time to a podcast episode is far higher than any other social media by pure minutes, but also by percent. Brands and advertisers are turning to podcasts more and more because they flat out work. So if we want more targeted, high quality traffic to our websites and landing pages, sponsoring the right podcast can provide a huge return on investment.